A Simplex converted to a Great Western Railway Prairie Tank. This one is part 62. Fitting all of the valve gear back together and a short test run using compressed air. Fitting the crosshead parts and the other connecting rod is done in exactly the same way as I showed in the previous episode. And as before, in order to fit the connecting rod, I have to tap out the taper pin and remove the return crank. I don't recommend using barcode spanners as hammers, but I just had it in my hand. Before fitting the connecting rod, it's a good idea to make sure that the oil hole in it is not blocked, and this one's fine. I made a second pin, and here it is fitted to the crosshead, complete with its spacer washer. The next step is to fit the 6 8BA bolts that hold the plate to the main crosshead. Be careful when you do this, it's incredibly easy to shear off 8BA bolts because they are very small. And just like the other side, I've fitted the centre nut that I turned down slightly in the lathe to hold the crosshead pin securely in place. And as previously shown, I fitted this nut by having the crosshead pin in the 3-jaw chuck in the lathe while I tightened the nut up against the plate. To prevent rust on the crosshead, I will be painting these nuts and bolts. And now it's time to fit the return crank. You may have noticed that there is room for a small spacer washer between the return crank and the crank pin's shoulder, but for the moment I'm not fitting this. If the engine makes a horrible rattling noise, I may do so, but I doubt it. Please note that when I use the hammer to tap the taper pin into place, I use lots of very light hammer blows. No sooner has the taper pin been fitted in place, I make a mark on the taper pin where I'm going to cut it, and then I tap it out again. First of all, I chop the taper pin using a pair of wire cutters, then I clean it up on my 1-inch belt sander, polish the end of it using my polishing spindle, and tap it back into place as shown here. The next thing I need to do is tighten the pinch bolt. And I really don't know what's happening with this engine, but I'm having difficulty finding the correct spanners to do the job. All the heads seem to be different sizes, but luckily, once again, my Blackgates Engineering very cheap laser cut spanner comes to the rescue. Now the taper pin looks the part with an equal amount sticking out at each side, and the pinch bolt is tightened. I repeat the process at the other side in exactly the same way. Now both of the return cranks are securely tightened and pinned to the crank pins on the wheels. The final job is to use a nut and a washer to secure the anchor link to the crosshead bracket. And now it's time to see if it all works. To start with, I'm using very low air pressure, and now I'm moving the engine into reverse gear, and yes, that works too. So I can give it a longer run, I'm going to fill the oil pump at the front of the engine, and to do this I'm using steam oil, the thick gloopy stuff. And as it's quite cool in the workshop today, it's thicker and gloopier than usual. I'm really having to put a lot of pressure on the handle of my Rylang oil can, and that's a good reason for recommending them because I've never managed to break one. But in the past, using cheaper oil cans, I have actually managed to snap off 1 or 2 handles. Time now to turn the pressure up for another test. That's okay, now with more pressure. I'm very pleased with this first test. These air tests that you've been watching are actually as they happened. I filled them from the beginning and I didn't have to have a rehearsal. My compressor's very small, so the air pressure soon diminished, and it didn't help having the steam chest covers just held in place with 2 nuts. Now it's time to remove the covers to paint them. After I've painted these covers, they'll be finally refitted, looking nice and black. I'm using a piece of Scotch-Brite to clean the surfaces ready for painting. First of all, using etching primer. This is really good stuff and really sticks to metal. This etching primer is designed for ferrous metals, but I do find that it works quite well on brass. Here's the usual shot of the paint drying, and while that's happening, I think it's time to clean up the reversing lever and remount it to the chassis. In the outer part of the workshop, the brake parts have been in this pot of cellulose thinners for a couple of days. So now I'm using a small paintbrush to apply some of it to get all the grime and the old paint off the reversing lever. And after I'd wiped off all of the cellulose thinners, I then fitted the reversing lever to the chassis, followed by fitting the long reach rod to the part of the valve gear that moves it. The reach rod is held in place to the fork using a special pin. Very shortly, I want to fit the boiler to this chassis, only loosely, not permanently, and give the whole thing a steam test in the workshop using a gas burner. My bottle of lubricating oil is getting a bit low, so I'm topping it up, first of all with lubricating oil, followed by adding some rapeseed oil to make the oil a bit slippery. Rapeseed oil makes a very good friction reducer, but do not use it for cylinder lubrication. That just needs to be neat steam oil as it comes out of the tin. When I test the reversing lever, it feels okay. It feels a bit dry because it's been in a tub of cellulose thinners to remove the grime and paint. So here I'm treating all the moving parts of the reversing lever to some oil. And now it feels very smooth. I had a bit of an oiling frenzy and went around the engine oiling every moving part. That's the axle boxes, the coupling rods, the connecting rods, all the valve gear links. In fact, every moving part on the engine. And that's it for this episode. I'd just like to say stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.